All right, it looks like I've been live for a few seconds. I'm using a new service to try to do this, and it's my first time doing that. So I'm not going to be very fluent right now. But today I made a Google Doc yesterday of some different resources and materials that we have created, and more so for this particular thing myself, over the past few years relating to how to respond to criticisms of ABA. And I realized that not everyone it has the time to read through that, or some people just prefer to listen. So I'm not going to be able to respond to comments while I'm doing this because I think I'm streaming in a few different places. However, I am just going to go ahead and read to everyone the book chapter in case you're wanting to check it out. I also, when I'm done, I'll come back and put the links. But if you're watching this on Instagram, the link to the Google Doc that I just referenced is in my bio. And if you're watching this on Facebook, it's a post on my Facebook page as well. So just as a heads up, the chapter is called The Compassionate and Curious Behavior Analyst, Navigating Criticism of Behavior Analysis. And it was published in 2021 in the book, Understanding Ethics and Behavior Analysis, edited by Ann Byrne and Jacob Sadavoy. I highly recommend purchasing that book. Like I said, I'll put the link after I finish. So the abstract is the field of behavior analysis frequently encounters criticisms from other psychological and educational approaches, as well as mainstream society. Over the past 20 years, this criticism has grown substantially in online forums and on social media with claims that ABA is abusive. Behavior analysts are unlikely to receive training in their coursework or supervision on how to address such criticisms. The ethics code for behavior analysts provides some insight with various code items focusing on client rights, diversity, and public engagement. Research on conflict resolution also provides actionable steps that behavior analysts can take to demonstrate compassion and curiosity and move toward resolving differences as opposed to perpetuating them. So going into the actual chapter, these chapters were not very long because the book covers a lot of different aspects of ethics in our field. So I'm just going to put that out there. It might seem like it's not the most in-depth, but it's the point of the chapter in 2021 was to get the conversation rolling, although I'm not super aware if many people even know the chapter's out there. So as I said, the chapter is called The Compassionate and Curious Behavior Analyst, Navigating Criticism of Behavior Analysis. Criticisms of behaviorism and the field of behavior analysis are not a new phenomenon. Popular critiques include the failure to account comprehensively for the human experience, early research focused on animal behavior, not human behavior, and the infamous debates between Noam Chomsky and B.F. Skinner on language development. As evidenced by the widely used Cooper et al. Textbooks, it should be fairly common for behavior analysts to discuss the criticisms in their coursework and to learn how to navigate these discussions by dispelling misconceptions or justifying their necessity from a behaviorist worldview. I just realized I could probably make this a little easier and screen share what I'm reading to you all in case people want to follow along. So here you go. Here's the Google Doc. Over the past 20 years, widespread criticism has grown relating to applied behavior analysis, ABA, as a therapy for autism being abusive. And there's a bunch of citations that I'm not going to read, but you can see them all right there. The arguments that surround this criticism are often seen in online forums and on social media. Based on the content in Cooper et al. 2007, it is unlikely that behavior analysts are receiving training on how to address these criticisms. It is also likely the training provided on supporting and promoting the science may run counter to making progress forward and lessening the divide between behavior analysts and those who oppose ABA. The discourse modeled for behavior analysts and conference presentations, journal articles, one that just came out recently, online discourse, social media, and the Professional and Ethical Compliance Code from the BACB in 2014 that are defensive in nature and fails to take into account research on how to navigate discourse with marginalized groups or people who are in disagreement. Again, a bunch of citations, check them out. The references are at the end of this document. Or recent literature and behavior analysis on cultural humility, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you can see the citations there. The purpose of this chapter is to briefly summarize the points being made by those who claim ABA as abusive and unethical, to explore the responsibility of board-certified behavior analysts and board-certified assistant behavior analysts in responding to or addressing these criticisms based on, at the time this ethics code had just come out, the Ethics Code for Behavior Analysts, BACB 2020, and to provide recommendations on how behavior analysts can be compassionate and curious when responding to criticisms of ABA. So one of the first things that comes up that we need to talk about in this chapter is ABA is abusive and unethical. Criticisms of abuse and ethical concerns surrounding ABA are also not a recent development. You can reference Bailey and Birch 2016 for more information on that. In the past few years, several articles published in peer-reviewed journals have either studied the impact of ABA therapy on autistics or outline historical perspectives and justifications as to why ABA should be considered abusive and unethical. A highly controversial article claiming autistics who receive ABA therapy have an increased risk of PTSD symptoms was published by Cooperstein in 2018. This research is cited frequently in the papers that follow as support that ABA is abusive or at least concerning. Leaf et al. In 2018 published an evaluation of Cooperstein's study and identified several methodological concerns. The hypothesis was focused on proving ABA was harmful, participant selection, framing of the questions in the survey, and interpretation of the results. Chown et al. In 2019 respond to this evaluation in a letter to the editor. They expressed three concerns with the evaluation. Cooperstein's study may have methodological weaknesses, but it was the first of its kind and was undertaken without funding. Leaf et al. Received funding from a special interest group and a donor who supports ABA interventions, thus bringing into question their objectivity in writing an evaluation. And despite the methodological weaknesses of Cooperstein's study, it provides enough information to justify a possible link, and this should be explored further. Sandoval, Norton, and Scheddy expressed their concerns with ABA therapy as applied to nonverbal autistics. They argue that ABA is unethical and abusive, promotes prompt dependency, only works for specific characteristics of autism, uses methodologies that are ineffective and out of date, and has no data showing long-term effectiveness. Gorky et al. Provide a response to this article, and Sandoval et al. Provide a response. There's a lot of back and forth with these articles, where they continue to assert that ABA is abusive, and they primarily argue that Gorky et al. Response was not specific to nonverbal autistics and ignored research from neuroscience relating to autism, even though the authors identified autism as a neurological diagnosis. Readers are encouraged to access each of these articles for free online to fully evaluate the points made in each article. I've included the references at the end of the Google Doc. Like I said, the link's in my bio, or I can get it to you. And if you can't access the articles, let me know and I'll help you get them if they're open source. It is important to note that in both of the examples provided above, the response articles from behavior analysts provide thorough rebuttals and defenses of the science of behavior analysis. But there is a failure to fully demonstrate curiosity, compassion, empathy, or any of the other behaviors recommended within the research on resolving conflict. And again, there's a bunch of articles there to learn more about that. Wilkenfield and McCarthy in 2020 provide a bioanalysis of ABA therapy. Their paper lays out the arguments for why ABA is unethical and accounts for potential objections to their claims. The authors posit the dominant form of ABA therapy is unethical because it infringes on the autonomy of children and potentially their parents as well. They also argue ABA therapy is unjust because it puts the burden on autistics to fit into society as opposed to society accepting and accommodating autistics. Lastly, they express concerns ABA therapy violates non-malfeasance due to the exorbitant cost and the real-world impact of ABA therapy. Most notably, the authors state, our central point in most of our arguments is that ABA alters behavior without engaging the patient as the person he is right now. Based on their analysis, they make the following recommendations. Use measures of success of ABA therapy that focus on the well-being of the individual instead of how well they function within a societal structure. Develop a deeper understanding of what aspects of a personality is essential versus accidental, and to change society to accept neurodiversity instead of insisting people change or act like someone they are not. Two publications provide a historical account of early research and applications of behavior analysis and express similar concerns. Kirkham 2017, Pine 2020. Examples of abusive behavior analytic practices identified in these papers include locking an autistic child in a room by himself daily for a year and ignoring him during tantrums, Forster 1964. striking an autistic girl who was self-injurious and admitting to being willing to strike her so hard she would die. Chance, 1974. The discourse from Lovas about the treatment he had designed and how he was, quote, building a person, the Feminine Boy Project that aimed to cure male children from becoming gay or trans, the consideration of autism as a deficit instead of a way of being, suppressing self-stimulatory behavior, and the overall dehumanization of autistics perpetuated by the field of behavior analysis. Yeah, I know that's a lot that I just read right there, and it's hard to read it sometimes. I've talked about this before on lives years ago that I thought I was potentially done doing. That I'm just going to pause at that paragraph right now and let that sit with folks. And then at the end of this book chapter, you'll see what the recommendations are for how do we navigate these realities and not get defensive, because I'm sure anyone who is watching this that is just hearing this information for the first time might be feeling defensive and upset right now. The thing I want to point out is, A, these are things that we did not learn about in grad school, or at least I didn't. I think some programs are starting to cover them now. B, if we don't talk about the things our science has done, and I know because it was in the very first edition, I think it continues to be in the ethics books from Dr. Bailey, about the Sunland Miami scandal. I think almost all of us know about that. It might have even been on the exam at one point. I don't know if it still is. That's, we hear about that, and that's a scandal that was addressed and overcome by our field. But there's a lot of these types of things that did happen. And yes, it was years ago, but if we don't learn about our history, we're destined to repeat it. And that's one point I want to make. I know it's outside of reading this chapter. The other point I want to make is every single thing I just read right now, you will find for every behavior analyst that wants to talk about this and confront it and disrupt it and address it and move forward, you will find behavior analysts either defending it or, well, I guess it's defending it, because they'll try to pick apart those research articles and say that those research articles or those publications are not credible. They don't say that things didn't happen. They just question the methods of that research. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm not saying we shouldn't engage in philosophical doubt or question and analyze things. And we also, as I'll talk about at the end of this chapter, we also need to make sure that we are truly listening to these criticisms and trying to understand them. These are real perspectives that people have about the work that we are doing. And we can't just dismiss them. Just dismissing them doesn't address them. It doesn't move us forward. Just protecting ourselves and defending ourselves and saying, but this is really what the science does not address any of those criticisms. And it doesn't show how, whether we say, okay, this was the worst research ever done, the perspectives are still out there. So how are we practicing in ways that address that? How are we practicing in ways that go to the suggestions made? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to go back to it, by the article from Wilkenfield and McCarthy. As much as you might want to criticize the methods, the recommendations are not bad. And how do we practice in ways that show we hear you? We've got these criticisms. Maybe we're not 100%. Some folks aren't 100% on board, or maybe everyone's not on board with like how the publications were done. But there's still legitimate criticisms. And these are the things we're doing to update our practices and ensure that we're not at risk of causing these harms. So that's my little rant there, sorry. Ledbetter et al. Argue that all stakeholders involved in autism intervention and research should understand neurodiversity and the views of autistic paper. Their paper provides recommendations based on a balanced view of neurodiversity. The authors identify 3 implications for intervention. 1, refrain from attempting to cure or normalize. 2, focus on improving physical or social emotional environments for autistics and address extrinsic factors that contribute to a negative experience or disadvantage. 3, depathologize characteristics of autism unless they are causing harm or discomfort to the individual or violating the rights of others. They also recommend interventionists and researchers reframe how they measure the effectiveness of their interventions to focus on outcomes that are most important to autonomy and well-being of the child. Use outcome measures that assess goodness of fit between the environment and the child, and to develop relationships with autistic people to develop a better understanding of autistic culture. This publication provides a much needed starting point for behavior analysts in navigating the neurodiversity movement while also adhering to our ethical responsibility. So how does all of this interact with the ethics code based on my analysis of it? And, we can discuss my background in ethics if folks would like to. Feel free to DM me. There are several sections of the code that should guide how behavior analysts respond to criticism of behavior analysis as described above. This section briefly highlights these sections. First, we must consider the core principles that apply. 1, benefit others. 2, treat others with compassion, dignity, and respect. And 4, ensure their competence. The publications discussed in the previous section indicate that for at least some of society, there are concerns that ABA is abusive and harmful. Based on these core principles, behavior analysts should be familiar with this research to ensure they are engaging in practices that truly protect the welfare and rights of their clients. They do so in respectful ways that provide space and opportunity for personal choice, and they remain knowledgeable of interventions that are culturally responsive, to include autism as its own culture. In reviewing the code, I identified at least 18 code items that inform how to engage with these criticisms of ABA. It is beyond the scope of this chapter to provide a detailed analysis of each code item. The reader is encouraged to review the code and analyze the interaction between the code items listed here and the information provided in the previous section. Determine how your practices uphold each of these code items, while also being responsive to the concerns of the public at large about abusive ABA practices. For example, we can analyze code 1.10, awareness of personal biases and challenges, with focus on personal biases. Given the learning history that most behavior analysts have relating to the beneficial aspects of behavior analysis and the presence of ableism inherent in our society, it is highly likely that our own personal biases will influence intervention development in ways that are deficit-focused and dehumanizing to autistics and other differing abilities. Because of this, behavior analysts are encouraged to actively engage with the literature regarding ableism, autistic culture, disability studies, and disability justice, to regularly interrogate how their own biases could potentially influence treatment and develop actionable steps to take to ensure their personal biases are not interfering with their professional work. Readers are encouraged to analyze at least the following code items in a similar manner, and then it lists the different code items. Closing out the chapter, encouraging folks to be compassionate and curious, and that's still something I'm working on. There are definitely parts of my life where I am not fully aligned with that, what I'm going to recommend here, but I do try to stick to it as much as possible. Research within and outside of the field of behavior analysis provides a framework for behavior analysts to follow in responding to criticisms of ABA. Again, there's a list of different citations. Based on this research and criticisms detailed in this chapter, behavior analysts can demonstrate compassionate and curious practices in the following ways. Be humble. Robinson and Carrick in 2020 evaluated the practitioner experience after receiving training on person-centered therapy. The authors conclude that when practitioners see themselves as the expert or fixer, they see problems that need corrected and lose sense of the person. This research points both to the necessity of staying humble and receiving training in person-centered approaches in order to work with clients and maintain their humanity. Listen to learn. Research demonstrates the effectiveness of empathy and compassion in improving outcomes and or resolving conflicts. There's some example articles there. Listening to learn involves maintaining curiosity, which most behavior analysts would understand as philosophical doubt. Compassionate listening involves 5 steps and is demonstrated to work effectively in resolving conflicts between groups. The 5 steps are: 1, cultivating compassion; 2, developing the fair witness; 3, respecting self and others; 4, listening with the heart; and 5, speaking from the heart. And that's from Furman in 2009. Kirkham in 2017 states the lack of meaningful dialogue between supporters and detractors of ABA means those controversies are unlikely to end soon. And Ledbetter et al. Provide a similar conclusion. With close attention to the needs, preferences, and priorities of autistic people, we can move beyond historical divides, misunderstandings, and wrongdoings to a place where we value the expertise of autistic people, embrace practices that respect and accept individual neurotypes, and ensure our interventions address the things that matter most to the recipients, end quote. The time has come where behavior analysts can no longer operate in their own bubble and worldview. Will we continue to choose to respond to criticisms defensively and with a strong, rigid adherence to defending the science in the same ineffective way as behavior analysts who came before us. See Critchfield et al. 2017 for more details on that. Or will we heed the advice provided above and take note of the research on conflict resolution to show the world that behavior analysts can do better and are compassionate and curious practitioners? That's the end of the chapter. The rest of this Google Doc has, again, some additional information and specific references and articles if you would like to read more about the different citations. I will be closing out this live here now that the article reading is done. I do want to say I'm hoping to do a couple more lives because there's a few additional issues that I've seen come up as folks have been trying to navigate some things recently relating to dealing with social media and criticisms of ABA. One of which is the different intersections that occur, the intersectionality and the bigger picture of why these conversations are even happening. Like, why is it even possible, especially when there's so many other things happening in the world? So I do want to touch on that a little bit, although my perspective is obviously going to be biased as a white woman. But I'm hoping to make a few points for people to think about and maybe possibly get a few folks that might want to join in the conversation. So thanks if you managed to watch all of this, and yeah, stay tuned for some more lives.